Hello, friends, and welcome back to Freakish Fridays. Tattooed Biker here with you. And tonight I have three bone-chilling tales of unexplained encounters with cryptids and strange beings in the deep woods, sent in by you viewers. Thanks to all those that sent in their harrowing true stories. Hope you guys enjoy hearing these just as much as I enjoyed reading them. So grab your hiking boots and let's ride into the deep woods. Number 1. Hey TB, I've been wanting to share this experience that happened a couple of years ago. My wife, daughter, and I went camping over Labor Day holiday weekend. We both took off work Friday and headed off to meet up with a group of friends who were camping with their kids and dogs. They were already out there and had found a nice campsite that was just big enough for our group. Just a spot off a service road with a primitive fire pit and not an official campground. In total, there were 10 of us, 7 adults and 3 tweens. We were camping out in an area south of Mount Rainier, Washington, just outside of the park boundary, off of a road that would lead you to a locked gate that enters the park. We knew at the end of the road was a locked gate because all the cars that went that way only had to flip back around because it was only accessible to National Park staff. We set up our camp in a flat area that would fit the 2 tents that they had raked up for us prior to our arrival. It was a bit closer to the road than their tents were. They had set up their tents a little further back. Once camp was set up, we hung out with our friends while the kids played and had dinner around the fire. Just friends hanging out, having drinks around the fire, and it was all great. We stayed up pretty late and everyone was getting tired and cold. Slowly, everyone faded off to their tents and bed. My wife was cold and went to warm up in the car, and then she proceeded to fall asleep there. Now my daughter and I are the last 2 awake out by the fire, and she decided that she wanted to sleep in the car where it was warm with my wife. I agreed that was okay, after I attempted to wake my wife up and get her to come to the tent, but she was out cold. So I watched her go to her tent and grab her blanket and her sleeping bag for my wife, as it was cold and I had turned the car off by now. She grabbed the stuff, zipped up the tent, and off to the car she went. I stayed up a little bit longer by the fire, and must have dozed off momentarily, because when I awoke, I was sitting in a camping chair, with only glowing embers, and it was pitch black. Only the coals of the fire glowing red in the now dead fire. I got up and found my way to the tent in the pitch blackness of the night, climbed in, and went to sleep. I was exhausted and fell asleep as soon as I hit that sleeping bag. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to my daughter's tent, kind of rustling in what sounded like 2 female voices, talking very softly. I listened intently, trying to hear what they were saying, but I couldn't really understand anything. There were no real discernible words coming out, just what sounded like mumbling, and then silence. I figured it was just my wife and daughter finding their way to my daughter's tent, not wanting to wake me up by being loud. Figuring my wife was just going to sleep in the tent with my daughter. However, now I'm up because my back is killing me, because the air mattress was now flat and airless. As I lie there, in what I can only describe as dead silence, I heard cracking like sticks breaking or popping, so I assumed it was the fire still hanging on somehow. Then I hear something moving around towards the front of my tent and then stop. Something is directly outside the front of my tent. I can feel it as well as sense it. So I slowly raise up to a seated position and hear something breathe in and exhale a large breath. This is the heaviest breath I've ever heard, and it was followed by what I can only describe as a very loud huff, as if from a horse or a cow or some other very large animal. I sat there, frozen with fear, trying to rationalize what it was I was hearing, and then it suddenly stopped. All I could hear was the deep one inhale and exhale and then that huff sound, before everything went silent. What followed next was an owl hooting a little ways off, back from the area behind our friend's tents, and after that I heard nothing else. No sounds at all, no fire popping, sticks cracking, absolutely nothing. I stayed there, sitting up frozen with fear for what seemed like forever, until I could tell the sun was coming up, and that it was light out now. I mustered the courage and go outside and check the ground in front of my tent, and that's when I noticed my daughter's tent unzipped and empty. I panic and rush to the car, and there they are, in the car still sound asleep. I see not a single track, nothing around our tents, and everyone else is about 20 to 30 yards away, still in their tents. Now I'm freaking out. Who did I hear talking? Who was skulking around the tent? What the hell was that breathing in front of me and huffing outside my tent? What opened my daughter's tent zipper? Surely there's an explanation, and I sit out there for at least an hour, getting the fire going as our friends begin to get up and move about. They slowly make their way to the fire, and I immediately start asking them, were the dogs out all night? Did you let them out? Were they sniffing around my tent? Did any of you wake up? And were you talking and moving around? And did you hear that owl? Nope, nope, and no, they all replied. I have no idea what that was talking softly, and what was breathing and huffing right in front of me. What the hell opened my daughter's tent in the night? I watched her zip it shut, and then go to the car. That breath and huff was so scary it left me frozen with fear, and I didn't move at all after hearing it, and sat there as silently as possible, not even wanting to breathe myself. One of the scariest moments of my life is something large and unknown in the darkness, directly in front of me, and the only thing separating us is a thin tent wall. This all happened Friday into Saturday morning, and we still have another night here. I decided that I'm not sleeping in the tent, and neither are my wife and daughter. The rest of the day went great, hanging out and having breakfast, going into town, Ashford, and going for a hike down the road to Lake Cora. Basically just camping and hanging. It's getting later now, and although the sun is out and the blue skies and the canopy, our camping area is thick. And even at the brightest point in the day, it's still getting pretty dark compared to the road area. As we are hanging out, we start hearing what can only be described as a whooping way off in the distance, and we're thinking, what is that? More time passes, and now a few of the people that were there with us when we arrived at the camp have left. There were just 7 of us now, and of those, 2 were pretty much always in their tent. So that left 5 of us hanging out by the fire. That's when dusk crept in, and my buddy began working on dinner. As we sat there from off in the woods between us and the park boundary towards the creek, we start hearing these blood-curdling screams and howling sounds that everyone there heard. We all stopped talking and just fell silent as we began to ask each other what that was. Then we heard this about 4 or 5 times. It sounded like a woman being murdered, and a howling type of sound. Then came a few tree knocks from the same general direction. We all began to wonder whether someone was just messing with us out there. Keeping in mind it's a holiday weekend, so tons of campers within a 15-mile radius. So I called my buddy over, and he hadn't heard the screams because he had been cooking on a skillet and had a propane lantern in front of him and behind him, and they were both quite loud. We stand there and listen, but don't hear it again. We decided we would do a tree knockback, closer to the road that divided us from the area where we heard the sounds. That is when we heard it. I got a chill down my spine to the core, and the hair all raised up on my arm and neck. We both looked at each other and at the same time asked, "Did you hear that?" I asked him what he heard, and we had both heard what we could only describe as a sound that a monkey or gorilla might make. like on the Discovery Channel or something. It was like a ooh-ah sound, and it was far off but really deep and rumbling, unlike what you would hear on TV. I want to say that it was directed or focused at us. I only say that because the other people were sitting behind us, maybe only 10 feet away, and didn't hear it. Now we're really freaking out and nobody is sleeping in their tents. We don't want to say anything and freak everyone else out because at this point they're already on edge. I've been hiking and camping here in the PNW for almost 20 years now, and I've never experienced this while I was out here. I'm 39 years old and from the East Coast and have been shot at and chased while growing up in rough areas of town. I'm a former U.S. Army infantryman who has spent countless nights in only a sleeping bag and dugout sleeping hole and in tents. But now I'm afraid to ever sleep in a tent again. I have never really felt fear like I did that first night in all my time out in the forest, except maybe when I was a kid in the woods back home. Thanks so much for reading. Signed, Rich. Number 2. Dear Biker, I've always been super creeped out by this experience, and I've thought a long time about sharing it, but it wasn't until I told one of my friends this story that they pointed out that this might be a Men in Black type of story. Anyway, here we go. Please forgive my grammar errors. It was my middle brother's 10th birthday. So this was around 2006, and the woods I grew up in as my backyard was in Seneca Creek Park, which is also where Blair Witch supposedly took place. My brother's birthday party was a pirate-themed one, and I guess my mom had given us chocolate coins for treasure. I don't really remember why, but all the boys at the party, myself and my mom, walked through the woods before having cake. My youngest brother Jesse, who was 6 at the time, told me when we got back to the house he left his coins by the bridge out in the woods. That part of the woods was where a fork came in the path. Left was the bridge leading to a walking trail, and the right was deeper on a path headed back toward the creek. So I decided I would go and find his coins and told him to come with me. Oddly enough, my mom warned us not to go, but we still did. The bridge was about a 5-minute walk from the bottom of our hill that was our backyard. We walked into the woods and everything was normal, just like it was when we were there with the group. We finally made it to the bridge, and I found Jesse's coins right away. I was bent down, and Jesse was behind me, and then I look up while grabbing the coin, and there's a man dressed in all white, with a white brim hat. I thought it was a cowboy hat. And then a man behind him, wearing all white as well, but no hat. They appeared just out of nowhere, and I started backing up right away when I saw the first man, because I was gripped with pure fear. He saw me scared and backing away, and he said, quote, "I don't bite." That's when I told Jesse to run, and I was screaming, "Run!" and we ran back home. I didn't even check to see if they were following us, but we ran all the way out of the woods and up the hill screaming, because the group and my mom were on the back deck, and I knew if the men knew people were listening for us, then maybe they wouldn't chase us. We told the boys and my mom what happened, and my mom said, "See, I told you so." And that was it. It was so scary, and they truly came out of nowhere. They just appeared. My brother remembers this just as vividly as I do. Has anyone else ever encountered men in all white deep in the woods? I never really knew what this all meant, but it was also creepy, and this is probably the best place to try and figure it out. Thanks for reading this far. Sincerely, Tim. Number 3. Dear Biker, I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra, for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test the rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't quite come up yet, I mean in almost a month and a half, polar nights are intense. This particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished and were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out of for safety. No cell reception and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure that you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 a.m, not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were about halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow, as the speed limit on the roads is only 25 miles per hour, when something appeared suddenly on the road in our headlights. It was a man, in jeans, sneakers, and just a hoodie jacket, walking down an ice road in the wilderness tundra at 4 a.m. when it was negative 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down, and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. This seemed plausible at the time. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't even seem cold. His clothing, while not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed that he wasn't native but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward, his face completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotion. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and was still in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a particular smell coming from him. He smelled acidic or something, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had suddenly had enough of all this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him, though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched on to my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free. At that moment, the guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in his scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle's dude still had a hold of my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was actually running alongside the truck, while the other guys in the cab held on to my buddy just to keep him inside. After several moments, it could have only been a few seconds, I don't know, but my buddy tore free from the guy, and we hauled ass back to the guard shack, another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard and were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the very next day. The next time we saw the guard at his shack, we asked him if they ever saw the guy on their patrols. He told us they had searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing, not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get back at us for making him waste a whole shift just driving around. But it wasn't a prank. And who would make up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer as to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that guy, if he even was a guy. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I'll work to write down more of my experiences and share them with you so that you can use them in videos if you want to. Thanks so much for reading. Signed, Anonymous. And there it is. 3 strange and unsettling true stories from the deep woods. What do you think these were? Cryptids? Just strange people? Elaborate pranks? I'd love to know your thoughts and theories down in the comments. If you have an experience with the unexplained to share, you can find my email in the description. Write it out, sparing no detail, and it just might make it into a future video. So anyways, thanks for watching. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe. I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker.